Who exactly do you think you are, a real pilot? Blake Morrison's voice cut sharply through the Colorado mountain air, his finger jabbing toward Eden Holloway, who stood quietly in her worn Air Force uniform. This is an elite survival retreat for the privileged, not some stage for cosplay frauds. His mocking laugh rang out, bouncing off the trees surrounding the luxury wilderness camp. Nearby, a young girl, the daughter of a veteran, was racing over to Eden, eager to snap a picture with the pilot lady she so admired. Before she could reach her, Blake shoved her aside without a second thought. Eden watched as little Lily stumbled, falling to the ground and bursting into tears. The rest of them had no idea that within 2 days, the sound of roaring jet engines would shake the skies above them, accompanied by holographic images of legendary female aviators soaring through the clouds. Have you ever been dismissed because you didn't fit someone else's narrow idea of what you should look like for your profession? This story is about what happens when someone bets against the wrong person. At 5'4" and just over 100 pounds, Eden Holloway didn't make the kind of impression people expected from a fighter pilot. Her short brown hair was neatly tucked behind her ears, and her steel gray eyes missed nothing as they scanned the crowd. At 29, she was one of the top F-35 Lightning II pilots in the U.S. Air Force, though the quiet way she carried herself and the faded edges of her uniform wouldn't give that away to a casual observer. She'd arrived at the Warrior Elite Retreat in the Colorado Rockies thinking it was a chance to finally relax after 6 grueling months on a classified mission. Unbeknownst to her, General Harrison had personally arranged for her to attend under a false identity, a part of a discreet character test meant to evaluate the integrity and leadership of the nation's privileged youth. The retreat itself was a curious contradiction, a so-called survival camp disguised as a luxury experience for the offspring of CEOs and billionaires. This particular gathering had been organized by Blake Morrison, a 33 years old, heir to the Winchester Holdings fortune, and desperate to salvage his public image after a messy insider trading scandal. At over 6 feet tall with sandy blonde hair and cold, calculating blue eyes, Blake strutted around the camp in $50,000 tactical gear that had never seen real danger. He'd once dreamed of becoming a pilot himself, but his domineering father had crushed those aspirations, shoving him into the family business where he felt like a permanent disappointment. Seeing Eden in a real military uniform rekindled an old bitterness in him. The confrontation started innocently when 8-year-old Lily Martinez, a daughter of Sergeant Martinez, a veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan, spotted Eden across the clearing. Pure excitement lit up the girl's face as she dashed over. "Are you a real pilot?" she asked breathlessly, eyes sparkling with awe. "My daddy says lady pilots are the bravest people in the world." Before Eden could answer, Blake's voice boomed over the gathering, drawing the attention of 800 wealthy guests, each having paid thousands for a weekend of curated danger and pampering. His accusation hung in the air like poison, turning what should have been a beautiful moment into something ugly and mean-spirited. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake announced, his voice dripping with smug authority, "it appears we have a case of stolen valor among us. This woman's wearing a uniform she has no right to, probably picked it up from a surplus store to scam donations out of honest Americans." A ripple of murmur spread through the crowd. Phones appeared, recording the scene in anticipation of drama. Eden felt the familiar sting of judgment, the same look she'd endured as a child when other kids mocked her for daring to dream of flying while girls were supposed to dream of simpler things. Blake's entourage, a collection of trust fund heirs and privileged hangers-on, chuckled and tossed crude remarks about fake soldiers and attention seekers. Someone shouted for her to prove herself. Others began chanting for Eden to take off the uniform. The tension escalated when Blake, encouraged by the crowd's reaction, decided to raise the stakes. "I've been told," he declared, lying without hesitation, "that this woman's been faking military credentials to scam veteran charities. She's nothing but a con artist taking advantage of good people's patriotism." Little Lily, still trying to get to Eden for a photo, was shoved aside again by Blake as she crossed his path. The child fell hard onto the gravel, scraping her knee and sobbing. Something in Eden's expressions shifted, a hardening that anyone who'd seen combat would have recognized instantly. She knelt beside the girl, lifting her gently and whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. Some people forget how to be kind. But that doesn't mean you should stop believing in heroes. Then Eden stood, her calm, steel-eyed gaze locking onto Blake's. "Mr. Morrison," she said softly, her voice carrying easily despite its quietness, "are you absolutely sure you want to continue down this road?" There was a stillness in her presence, the kind of stillness you get just before a lightning storm breaks. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, sensing something they couldn't quite name. But Blake, riding high on his own arrogance and the cheers of his audience, doubled down. "What are you gonna do about it?" he sneered, his voice thick with contempt. "Fly away? Show us your magical airplane? Or maybe slink off like the fraud you are?" Eden glanced up at the endless blue Colorado sky, then back at Blake. There was something like pity in her eyes. "I asked if you were certain," she said quietly, then turned and walked away without another word. Blake, feeling victorious, pumped his fist to the cheering crowd. But he didn't notice Eden duck into the trees and place a phone call. He couldn't hear the quiet voice on the other end addressing her as Major Holloway and discussing something called Operation Sky Justice. And most importantly, he had no idea that his challenge had just been accepted today and it would change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. The phone call that would alter everything went to a modest home in rural Virginia, where Major David Holloway sat in his workshop surrounded by model airplanes and faded memories of a different war. At 58, David carried the visible scars of the Gulf War, his right arm gone from the elbow down after a night blast that should have taken his life. Beside him sat his wife, Catherine, a former combat medic who'd lost her leg to a roadside bomb outside a field hospital in Kuwait. Together, they'd raised their daughter Eden in an abandoned military training camp deep in the Virginia wilderness, where they taught her the kind of strength that comes not from appearances, but from what you're willing to stand for. Eden's childhood was anything but ordinary. She grew up in a world where the ghosts of old wars whispered through crumbling barracks and forgotten airfields. Her father had taught her to fly radio-controlled planes at 12, using the cracked runway where supply transports once landed. "Flying isn't about conquering the sky," he'd told her on those long summer days when she struggled to master the controls. "It's about knowing you're part of something bigger. The sky doesn't care about money, gender, or color. It only cares if you respect it enough to learn." Those lessons carried her through to a full scholarship at Embry-Riddle, despite being suspended for a year after conducting an unauthorized aerial rescue during a flood, saving 3 families from drowning. The call came just as David was wiping down a newly built model plane for the local kids club, a hobby that kept him connected to the sky even after his injury. Eden's voice came through clear and steady, and he knew the tone before she even spoke a word. Eden had always known how to keep her voice steady, even when her heart ached, a skill she'd learned young, growing up with a combat medic mother and a war-scarred father. But as she spoke into the phone now, her words carried the faint tremor of someone fighting to stay composed. Broken bar. "Something happened today. I need to tell you about it." On the other end of the line, in a modest Virginia workshop cluttered with half-finished model airplanes and the scent of wood shavings, Major David Holloway felt his jaw tighten, his weathered face, lined by both age and battle, hardened as Eden relayed what had unfolded at the retreat. Catherine, listening from nearby in her wheelchair, felt old memories stir out, the sting of being dismissed by smug colleagues who believed women didn't belong on a battlefield, much less leading a triage unit under fire. When Eden finished, a heavy silence hung between them for a moment before David spoke, his voice low but carrying the gravity of a man who'd seen too much and endured even more. "Sweetheart," he said quietly, "you've given this country your time, your youth, your safety, things people like that Morrison kid wouldn't even begin to understand. You've earned that uniform in ways most folks will never have to." Eden could picture her father in his workshop, surrounded by memories of flight and the lessons he taught her about patience, precision, and never backing down when what was right was on the line. Catherine took the phone then, her voice gentle but edged with steel. "Honey," she said, "you remember what we taught you? Some people need to learn there are consequences for cruelty. You weren't raised to let cowards write your story." Standing alone beneath the vast, starlit Colorado sky, the same sky that had been her second home for over a decade, Eden felt a familiar pull, a weightless sense of purpose she'd followed since childhood. She thought of Lily's tears, of the viral videos already no doubt circulating, of other little girls who might grow up thinking courage could be shouted down by arrogance. "I've never used my rank or position for personal reasons," she told her parents, her words carrying the weight of someone acutely aware of the responsibility that came with her station. But even as she said it, she felt a steely resolve lock into place. But sometimes, honor demands a response. And sometimes people need to be reminded actions have consequences. On the other end, David chuckled softly, a smile in his voice Eden could almost see. "There's a reason you're one of the best pilots this country's ever had. And it's not just skill or bravery, though you've got both to spare. It's because you understand flying isn't about ego, it's about service. And sometimes that means delivering a message loud and clear." As the call ended, Eden looked up at the stars, imagining the pioneers of aviation watching from somewhere beyond the clouds. Tomorrow, she would honor them in a way Blake Morrison wouldn't soon forget. Back in Virginia, the workshop settled into a quiet stillness, but Catherine and David exchanged knowing glances. "She's going to show them," Catherine murmured, her gaze distant, proud. David nodded, his hand brushing the metal case on his workbench where his daughter's commendations lay alongside his own. "Yeah," he agreed. "And she's going to remind them what a real pilot looks like." At the same moment, miles away, Colonel Sarah Mitchell picked up her secure line on the second ring. She didn't need to check the caller ID. Major Eden Holloway only used that number when something serious was in motion. At 45, Mitchell was a legend in her own right, a combat pilot whose service record outpaced most men twice her size and a mentor who'd guided Eden through the most challenging phases of her career. "Colonel," Eden's voice came through steady, but Mitchell recognized the particular calm of a soldier with a mission. "I need to discuss a situation requiring both your judgment and your discretion." As Eden relayed the events at the retreat, Mitchell's expression darkened. Equal parts anger and excitement flickered in her eyes. By the time Eden finished, Mitchell had already pulled up her classified schedule. "Well," Mitchell said, a dangerous smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, "it just so happens we've got a training exercise on the books for tomorrow morning, a legacy wing, new tech, augmented reality projections of historic aircraft flying alongside our modern fighters. The brass wants to see how connecting pilots to their history affects morale." She paused, eyes scanning the secure terminal beside her. "And wouldn't you know it, the airspace covers your little retreat. We need a seasoned pilot to test the system." The timing was suspiciously perfect, but Eden had long since learned that sometimes the universe hands you exactly the opportunity you need if you're bold enough to take it. The Legacy Wings program had been designed to inspire young airmen and women by projecting holographic images of aviation legends Amelia Earhart, Jacqueline Cochran, and the daring wasps of World War II alongside today's finest. The tech was state-of-the-art, using advanced airborne projection systems to create astonishingly realistic images visible from the ground. For a test flight this delicate, they needed someone who could execute precision maneuvers while holding formation with virtual aircraft, and Eden fit that bill better than anyone. Meanwhile, less than a mile away, Blake Morrison was preparing for what he thought would be his crowning moment. He spent the evening assembling a social media campaign aimed at publicly disgracing Eden. Fabricated evidence, doctored images, and carefully worded posts designed to go viral. He had no idea that the real show was about to begin overhead, and this time, it wasn't a performance he controlled. Blake Morrison had meticulously crafted a campaign to dismantle Eden's reputation. He gathered orchestrated testimonials from supposed witnesses who claimed to have seen suspicious behavior by her at previous events. His plan was to hold a press conference the next morning, inviting local news crews and streaming the event live to an audience he expected would number in the tens of thousands. He even hired a private investigator to dig into Eden's background, though the investigator warned him that military personnel files were highly protected and notoriously difficult to access. Blake pressed on undeterred. The irony was completely lost on him. His own dreams of a military career had been crushed, not by lack of skill or courage, but because his father insisted the family business needed him more than the Air Force needed another pilot. That buried resentment had festered into bitter contempt for anyone who had achieved what he never could. Seeing Eden in her worn uniform had ignited something primal inside him, a toxic mix of jealousy, anger, and the deep insecurity of someone who had never faced real challenges. Blake genuinely believed that by destroying her credibility, he could somehow validate his own choices and prove he hadn't missed out on anything meaningful. The press conference was slated for 10 a.m. A strategic time to catch the morning news cycle when people were most likely scrolling their phones or laptops. Blake prepared a detailed presentation, complete with slides and documents, most of them fabricated but crafted convincingly enough to fool those eager to believe the worst. He even arranged for several paid witnesses to testify about Eden's supposed fraudulent actions, offering enough money to silence any moral hesitation about lying under oath. His plan was thorough, professional and destined to spectacularly backfire. What Blake didn't know was that Eden's military record wasn't just legitimate, it was extraordinary enough to impress even the most seasoned officers. Her file held commendations for valor, glowing efficiency reports peppered with words like exceptional and irreplaceable, and mission details so classified they were sealed behind layers of national security. The private investigator Blake had hired, a former service member himself, finally uncovered enough to grasp the truth about Eden. He immediately called Blake to warn him he was on the verge of a career-ending mistake. But Blake, intoxicated by his own sense of cleverness and superiority, ignored the warning. He dismissed the caution as cowardice and pushed forward, scheduling the press conference and inviting every media outlet within 100 miles. He promised the world he would expose a dangerous fraud who had been dishonoring the military and exploiting the generosity of patriotic Americans. That night, Blake went to sleep dreaming of vindication, blissfully unaware that just 800 meters away, Colonel Mitchell was coordinating with Peterson Space Force Base to ensure Eden would have access to the most advanced fighter jets in the U.S. arsenal. The stage was set for a showdown that would be remembered long after the players returned to their everyday lives. A collision between arrogance and authenticity, between playing at importance and truly serving something greater than oneself. Eden spent her final evening before the demonstration walking through the quiet Colorado wilderness, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Meanwhile, Blake practiced his speech in front of a mirror, completely oblivious to the fact that by noon the next day, his entire worldview would be shattered by the roar of jet engines and the sight of legends soaring across the sky above him. Morning broke clear and bright over the Colorado Rockies, with visibility stretching for miles and wind conditions ideal for precise flying. Eden rose before dawn, reviewing weather data, flight routes, and the augmented reality system's technical details of the very technology that would soon turn her training flight into something extraordinary. At Peterson Space Force Base, ground crews finalized adjustments to the Rafale fighter jet that would carry her. Its sophisticated electronics were modified to project holograms of 12 legendary female aviators, trailblazers who had changed the course of history. Across the retreat, Blake Morrison awoke in his luxury tent brimming with confidence, convinced he held all the cards. Unbeknownst to him, Eden was already airborne, approaching the arena from 30,000 feet above. He spent the morning rehearsing his presentation, coordinating with media representatives who'd agreed to cover what he promised would be a bombshell expose. Copyright of military fraud. 800 wealthy guests filled the main amphitheater, phones ready to capture the spectacle they expected, a theatrical takedown of a challenger to their social order. At exactly 10 a.m., Blake stepped onto the makeshift stage, dressed in a custom-tailored outfit that cost more than most earned in months. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with rehearsed authority, "I've gathered you here today to expose a dangerous fraud, a threat to military honor and the integrity of charitable giving in America." Behind him, a large screen displayed supposed evidence, altered photos and testimonials from people who had never actually met Eden. "This woman," Blake said, pointing to a photo of Eden in uniform, "has been masquerading as a military pilot for months, possibly years, using stolen valor to exploit veteran families and patriotic organizations." The crowd murmured, phones recording every word. "I have documented proof she bought her uniform from a surplus store, fabricated service records, and collected donations under false pretenses. Today, I demand a full investigation and that she be charged with criminal fraud." What Blake couldn't see, focused as he was on the stage and the nodding heads in the crowd, was a tiny dot growing larger in the sky. Eden was approaching from the south, flying low and fast, set to pass directly over the retreat at exactly 10:15. The Rafale's engines were barely audible at that distance, but a few in the crowd began looking upward, curiosity replacing their attention as the distant roar grew louder. "I challenge this so-called pilot," Blake shouted, his voice rising with theatrical fury, "to prove her claims right here, right now. If she's really military, let her show us her aircraft. Let her demonstrate the skills she boasts of. Let her prove she deserves the uniform of those who truly serve our country." Little did Blake know, his challenge was about to be answered in the most breathtaking and undeniable way imaginably as the roar of jet engines filled the sky. The roar of jet engines was no longer subtle. Several people in the crowd now pointed skyward, their faces a mix of wonder and confusion. Blake, determined to control the narrative, raised his voice above the growing noise. "There's nothing to prove here. She's a fraud, a liar, a disgrace to everyone who has ever legitimately worn the uniform," he shouted. But his words were increasingly drowned out as the Rafale drew closer. Then something remarkable happened that stole everyone's attention away from Blake Morrison and his accusations. The augmented reality system activated just as Eden aligned her aircraft perfectly with 12 holographic images of the most iconic female aviators in history. Suddenly, the sky above the retreat was filled with ethereal images of planes from different eras flying in flawless formation alongside Eden's modern fighter. There was Amelia Earhart in her Lockheed Vega, Jacqueline Cochran in her Mustang, and 10 other aviation pioneers. Their aircraft shimmered like mirages, clearly visible to the awestruck crowd below. Silence fell as the formation glided directly overhead, the sound of Eden's engines mixing with the haunting strains of the U.S. Air Force song broadcast through speakers mounted on her plane. Blake's jaw dropped in disbelief. Eden was not only piloting a military aircraft, but doing so with a skill and precision that spoke of thousands of hours of training and real combat experience. The holographic squadron completed a flawless aerial salute over the amphitheater, led by Eden's Rafale in a maneuver that brought tears to the eyes of several veterans in the audience. As the formation vanished over the mountains, leaving only the fading engine roar and the lingering images of legends, Blake Morrison stood frozen at the podium, his carefully crafted speech forgotten, his confident facade shattered completely. In just 5 minutes, his meticulously built story lay in ruins, undone by nothing more than a pure display of authentic skill and true service. The crowd remained silent, absorbing the moment until someone at the back began to applaud. The applause spread quickly, growing into a full ovation for what they had just witnessed. Eden's plane had barely disappeared behind the peaks when a small parachute deployed above the amphitheater, dropping a military-style container that landed with a firm thud right in front of Blake's podium. The crowd watched, fascinated, as the container opened to reveal official documents, photographs, and military decorations telling the real story of Major Eden Holloway's dedication to her country. Blake approached the container, hands trembling, face pale as the weight of his error and the truth about Eden dawned on him. The first document he pulled out was Eden's official military ID, complete with her photo, service number, and rank: a major in the United States Air Force. Beneath that lay commendations for valor, efficiency reports filled with superlatives usually reserved for the most exceptional officers, and photos of Eden with top military leaders, including a striking image of her receiving a medal from the president himself. Each piece of evidence further undermined Blake's credibility, painting a picture of a woman who had devoted her life to service while he had been squandering inherited privilege. The crowd pressed closer as Blake continued reading, his voice weakening with every revelation about Eden's true achievements: 847 hours of combat flight time, records of 3 separate rescue missions saving civilian lives, and even a partially declassified classified service record made available specifically for this demonstration. By the time he reached the bottom of the container, Blake understood that he wasn't merely wrong about Eden, he was wrong in a way that made him look foolish, malicious, and completely disconnected from reality. Then, the most powerful moment came. 8-year-old Lily Martinez broke free from her father's protective grip and ran to the front, her face shining with joy and vindication. "I knew you were real," She called out to the sky where Eden's aircraft had vanished. "I told everyone you were a real pilot. But they wouldn't listen to me." Her words carried a truth that no official document could match. Children have a rare instinct for authenticity that adults often lose in their cynicism and bias. Just then, Eden herself appeared at the edge of the crowd. She had changed from her flight suit into civilian clothes, but now carried a new presence, a quiet authority that made people step aside as she approached the amphitheater. The woman who had been dismissed as a fraud only hours before now moved with the confident bearing of someone who had nothing left to prove and everything to be proud of. "Mr. Morrison," Eden said softly as she reached the podium, her voice clear and steady despite its gentle tone, "I am Major Eden Holloway, 23rd Fighter Squadron, United States Air Force. I have served my country for 11 years, including multiple combat deployments and classified missions that I cannot discuss publicly." She gestured toward the scattered documents at Blake's feet. "Everything you need to verify my service is right here. Though I suspect you already realize that your accusations were not only unfounded but dangerously reckless." Blake tried to speak, to offer some kind of explanation or excuse, but no words came. His entire attack had been built on the assumption that Eden was powerless, someone he could easily bully and discredit without consequence. Now, faced with the truth of who she was and all she had achieved, he felt smaller than ever before. The crowd that had cheered his accusations just hours earlier now looked at him with a mix of disappointment and disgust. "You asked me to prove I could fly," Eden continued, measured and precise. "You challenged me to show my aircraft and demonstrate my skills. I hope this demonstration was educational, Mr. Morrison, because it was meant specifically for you." Her gentle tone held a quiet mockery more devastating than any angry outburst, exposing the absurdity of Blake's position with surgical precision. Little Lily ran to Eden's side, slipping her small hand into the pilot's larger one, looking up at her with wide-eyed admiration. "Are you going to fly again?" she asked eagerly. "Can you show me how to be a pilot like you?" Eden knelt to the child's level, her stern expression softening into warmth. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "the most important part of being a pilot isn't just flying, it's knowing you have a responsibility to use your skills to help others, protect those who can't protect themselves, and stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." What Blake had intended as a public humiliation for Eden had instead become his own moment of reckoning, broadcast live to thousands and shared across countless platforms. Within hours, millions would see the video, and not for the reasons Blake had hoped, but as a powerful testament to true service overcoming manufactured outrage, substance defeating superficiality in the most dramatic way. As Eden walked away from the amphitheater with little Lily skipping beside her, Blake Morrison remained rooted among the scattered documents, telling a story of genuine dedication far beyond anything he had ever known. The crowd slowly dispersed, many stopping to photograph the military records and medals, a stark reminder of the difference between true service and mere pretense. For Blake, the realization began to sink in. He hadn't just embarrassed himself, he had done so in a way that would haunt him for the rest of his life. That very evening, Blake Morrison vanished from social media, his accounts going dark as the video of Eden's aerial demonstration spread like wildfire across the internet. Within 24 hours, Sky Justice had been viewed 50 million times, with comments pouring in from active military personnel, veterans, and civilians moved by the powerful display of authentic service triumphing over contrived outrage. Blake's friends and social circle, embarrassed by their association with his public disgrace, distanced themselves with the practiced ease of those who value social status over loyalty. Meanwhile, Blake faced consequences he had never before encountered in his privileged life. Winchester Holdings Board, led by his own father, unanimously voted to remove him from all company roles, citing damage to the corporate reputation and serious doubts about his judgment. His trust fund was frozen pending a review of his recent actions, and the luxurious lifestyle he had taken for granted became a thing of the past. For the first 3 months after the incident, Blake wallowed in self-pity and bitterness, convinced he had been unfairly punished for what he saw as awe. At first, Blake saw his mistake as a simple error, but as the weeks passed and the weight of his isolation settled in, his perspective began to shift. A private investigator he had hired sent him Eden's full military record of the unclassified portions, and Blake found himself immersed in the story of a woman who had repeatedly put her life on the line for strangers, who had declined lucrative civilian jobs to continue serving her country, and who by age 29 had accomplished far more than Blake ever had in his 33 years. The turning point came when Blake learned that several families of female veterans had received anonymous letters of apology, written in his handwriting but sent without his knowledge by the private investigator, who had been appalled by Blake's initial assignment. The responses filled with grace and forgiveness from those who had every right to be angry shamed Blake in ways no punishment ever could. He began to realize that his attack on Eden wasn't just misguided, it was an assault on everyone who had worn the uniform and sacrificed for their country. Over the next 6 months, Blake underwent a profound transformation, quiet and largely unnoticed by the public, who assumed he had simply vanished in disgrace. He sold off his luxury belongings, moved into a modest apartment, and devoted himself to volunteering at organizations supporting military families and veterans. He devoured books on military history, focusing especially on women's contributions to aviation and combat roles. Most importantly, he began writing heartfelt letters of apology to Eden and to the families of female service members, and not seeking forgiveness, but simply acknowledging the damage he had caused. These letters were painstakingly handwritten on fine stationery, carefully researched and deeply personal. While many went unanswered, the act of writing them was reshaping Blake in ways he never anticipated. The culmination of his transformation came in the form of a memorial service he organized at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, honoring female aviators who had died serving their country. For months, he coordinated with military officials, veteran groups, and the families of the fallen. The ceremony was set to coincide with the anniversary of the incident with Eden. Blake sent her a personal invitation, crafted with great care, not asking for forgiveness but simply requesting her presence at an event meant to honor the trailblazers who had made her career possible. Eden received the invitation with skepticism, suspecting a public relations ploy or an attempt at personal redemption that would exploit her attendance. She had General Harrison's intelligence team investigate Blake's recent activities, and the report she received surprised her. He had donated nearly his entire inheritance to military family organizations, volunteered 30 hours a week at veteran service centers, and embraced a genuinely humble lifestyle far removed from his former excesses. The memorial service was a triumph of planning and emotion, held in the museum's Grand Gallery, surrounded by iconic aircraft representing American aviation history. It was attended by 300 family members of fallen female aviators, active duty personnel, and veterans who had served alongside those women. Blake spoke briefly, and not about himself, but about the courage and sacrifice of women who had broken barriers and paid a price few could comprehend. His words were simple, sincere, and focused entirely on honoring others rather than seeking to redeem himself. When Eden arrived, moved despite her doubts by the event's authenticity and the palpable emotion, Blake noticed but did not approach her. Instead, he dedicated himself to supporting the families and ensuring their needs were met. Only after the ceremony concluded, and most guests had departed, did Eden approach Blake, ready for the conversation that would determine whether his transformation was sincere or merely a carefully constructed performance. Their talk took place in a quiet corridor of the museum, surrounded by the echoes of aviation history and the weight of what had transpired between them. Blake looked markedly different from the arrogant man who had confronted her 6 months earlier, his expensive clothes replaced by a simple suit, his swagger replaced by genuine humility. "Major Holloway," he said quietly, "I don't expect your forgiveness, nor am I asking for it. I organized this ceremony because these women deserve to be honored and because I needed to do something meaningful with the privilege I was born into." Eden studied his face intently, applying the same analytical rigor that had kept her alive in combat to gauge if his change was authentic or another act. "Mr. Morrison," she replied, "actions speak louder than words. 6 months ago, your actions caused real harm to real people. You didn't just attack me, you attacked every woman who has served, every veteran whose legitimacy has been questioned, and every child who dreams of serving something greater than themselves." Her tone was calm but resolute, making clear that redemption would not come without effort and consequence. Blake nodded without defensiveness. "You're absolutely right. I've spent these past 6 months trying to understand how I became capable of what I did, and how I can use whatever time I have left to make amends. I know I can't undo the harm, but I hope to prevent others from making the same mistakes." These women changed the world by refusing to accept the limits others tried to impose. "I want to spend the rest of my life supporting those fighting those same battles." What followed was a conversation lasting 2 hours, covering everything from Blake's childhood disappointments to Eden's own struggles being accepted in a male-dominated field. Blake spoke honestly about his jealousy. Blake opened up about his insecurities and how his privileged upbringing had shielded him from facing the consequences of his actions until it was nearly too late. Eden shared her own struggles with discrimination and doubted the moments she questioned whether she truly belonged in the cockpit of a fighter jet, and the mentors who taught her that belonging isn't granted by others but earned through skill and character. By the end of their conversation, Eden made a decision that surprised even herself. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I'm going to suggest something that might sound crazy, but I believe you've earned the right to be taken seriously. I'm working with the Air Force to create a foundation offering scholarships and mentorship to young people who want to serve but face financial or social barriers. We need someone with real business experience and genuine commitment to help build something lasting. Are you interested in doing meaningful work for people who truly need it?" Blake's response was immediate and heartfelt, tears welling in his eyes as he realized Eden wasn't just offering forgiveness but a partnership in something important. "Major," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "it would be the greatest honor of my life to work with you on this. I promise to bring the same dedication to this foundation that you bring to your service, and I will never again take for granted the trust people place in me." Their handshake was firm and sincere, sealing a partnership that would change thousands of lives in the years to come. 6 months later, the Wings of Honor Foundation was officially launched at a ceremony held at the Air Force Academy. Eden served as chief pilot instructor, while Blake managed business operations and fundraising. Their inaugural scholarship class included 50 young people from military families, among them Lily Martinez, accepted into a special program for aspiring aviators. Hundreds of military personnel, government officials, and private donors attended the launch, inspired by how two people had turned a moment of conflict into a lasting opportunity for service. Eden's speech was brief but powerful, emphasizing the responsibility that comes with the privilege of flight and the importance of using that privilege to lift others up instead of tearing them down. "Flying teaches you that the sky is big enough for everyone," she said, looking out over an audience that included many who had witnessed Blake's original attack. "It doesn't matter where you come from or the challenges you face. If you have the courage to reach for the sky and the determination to keep reaching even when others doubt you, there will always be room for you up there." Blake's transformation was complete during that ceremony. Standing beside Eden as the first class of Wings of Honor scholars took their oath of commitment, he no longer looked like the spoiled heir who had attacked a woman in uniform, but a man who had finally found his true purpose after years of searching in all the wrong places. Over the following decades, the foundation provided opportunities to thousands of young people, yet its greatest achievement was perhaps the proof that even the most privileged and misguided individual can change when confronted with genuine courage and given a chance to serve something bigger than themselves. Years later, when asked about the incident that had sparked it all, Eden would smile and look up to the sky where she had spent so much of her life. "Sometimes," she said, "the most important flights aren't the ones that take you away from your problems but the ones that force your problems to look up and see what true strength looks like." The Wings of Honor Foundation grew to become one of the most successful veteran service organizations in American history. Its real legacy, however, was the lesson it taught about the power of authentic service to transform not only individual lives but entire communities. The story of Eden Holloway and Blake Morrison became required reading in military academies and business schools alike, not because it was a flawless redemption tale, but because it was a true story about the choices people make when faced with their own limitations and the chance for real change. Eden continued flying with the Air Force until retiring as a colonel, training hundreds of pilots and never losing sight of the little girl who had believed in her when others doubted. Blake dedicated the rest of his life to the foundation, never seeking public recognition for his transformation but finding quiet fulfillment in knowing his privilege was finally used for something meaningful. And somewhere in the skies above America, on any given day, you might see the contrails of aircraft flown by young men and women whose dreams were made possible by a foundation that began with a challenge, grew through conflict, and blossomed into something beautiful through the simple belief that everyone deserves the chance to reach for the sky, no matter who they are or where they come from, because the sky, after all, is big enough for anyone with the courage to fly. From the whispers to the wreckage, Ya Stories brings it all.